making the proper intro. So, hey, lemlisters, I'm super pumped today to be joined with Michael Tuso. 100% remote team, constant employee growth, it's in the company DNA. One person behind this, Michael Tuso. I'm super excited to announce that our today's guest is the Sales Development Leader of the Year and the Director of Revenue Performance at Chili Piper, a company that have raised more than $50 million in the last years. Michael, welcome, and thanks a lot for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
That's really awesome. So I had a question for you because it's not a term that we hear a lot. So Chili Pepper being like a 100% remote team and you being Director of Revenue Performance, what exactly does the Director of Performance actually do?
It's funny because I wrote a LinkedIn post last year and I was like, you know what? Like I searched all of LinkedIn. I was unable to find someone with the same title, Director of Revenue Performance. And it was really born out of a conversation with our CEO. And, I realized I didn't want to go on the trajectory of being a VP of sales. And I think a lot of AEs out there think that that's kind of the only trajectory that their career could take. And I sort of said to myself and the CEO, like, I don't want to do that. And so what we did is we created a role specifically for me. And obviously, like, it took a lot of trust building with the CEO. It took a lot of like delivering results day in and day out for a long time. And obviously, like the relationship in order for that to happen. And so the role that we created together is really centered around this idea of coaching and training. And the thing that I am really focused on is directly in my title, like, is the revenue of the company performing? And so as a result, I could be working on a myriad of different things in any given day. I can go from a coaching session with an SDR, an AE, or account manager, to strategizing with leaders in the company, to working on a marketing campaign and things like that. But I would say that the bulk of my job is owning the coaching and training and the sort of people development piece at the company, which we have really doubled down on as a critical piece of our success. So in a nutshell, that's what I do.
That's really, really interesting. And I'm curious, so how exactly do you tie the people growth, since you're doing a lot of coaching, to the revenue? Is there like, do you have specific KPIs for that, or how exactly does that work?
Yeah, so I really think that revenue in and of itself is a lagging indicator, right? It's the end result. And so if revenue is the end result, you have to figure out what are all of the things that comprise, revenue. We all know that it's very difficult to generate revenue, and you can't just wave your magic wand. You can't just pass the modern equivalent of the yellow pages to your salespeople and say, "Oh, good luck." And so what we're seeing in these like high growth companies is that they're much more likely to have a cadence around coaching and training and this people development piece. I felt like a lot of the metrics in this area were a bit outdated, and so we actually create a number of our own. One of the things that we created was a call scoring structure for all of our calls that are team specific. We also do process scoring and things like that as well, that we really sit down and say, like, what are the things that meaningfully impact revenue and how do we measure it? Something more recently we developed is a net improvement score that I own. And it's like, are the reps improving? What are the ways that we can measure that? And let's track it quarter over quarter. So yes, we care about ramp time, like in sales enablement. Yes, we care about productivity. Yes, we care about like revenue as well. But we try to get like more creative with this as well and think about the people development piece. And the more honestly we've leaned away from how many calls did you make, how many emails did you send, and into like the people development piece, like the skill building, how they deal with objections, how that call went, what was the scoring of the calls maybe an AE ran. The more we lean into the people element, the better the revenue to get. And so it's, building the sales team here and the organization is always the experiment I've always wanted to run. And it's been just so fascinating and such a great like learning experience. There's also other things that it impacts as well in terms of metrics. Your attrition rates of employees go way down when you develop a culture of coaching and training, and people are much more likely to stay with you in the company because they feel like they're progressing in their career. And I think a lot of companies think that like, oh, you own title is the only way that people want to grow. That's their only definition of mobility. And it's like, no, it's not just title. Maybe that's a small part of it. Maybe compensation is a part of it. Do people feel just in both of those areas? But the real big kicker for us is this concept of learning. I think like somehow like we really get away from that. And I think if your team is constantly in this space of learning, they're not stressed out, they're more likely to stay with you. And there's so many benefits to revenue that are really quite profound. So that's kind of how I think about that.
And I'm curious because you're talking a lot about, like learning, having them like improve their skills. How exactly do you measure that? Like you mentioned like efficiency on the calls, how to handle objections, this type of things. Is there like anything that is like, I don't know, conversion rate from leads or like prospect to lead or lead to clients, etc.? Like how does the revenue come into place in all of that? If it does actually.
Yeah. So our product handles a lot of the conversion rate pieces for us, and so with the specifically on inbound. So for the revenue, are you asking about the revenue metrics that I look at, or?
Yeah, I'm curious to see because you were mentioning like like essentially you're coaching your reps to become better, learn new skills, and improve. And I was wondering, like, how exactly do you make sure that they are improving? Is it based on revenue or a specific metric that you can measure? Or is it more like,
Yeah. I see what you're saying. So revenue, I do look at obviously, but not in like a super like pressured way. I think in my experience, the more you apply pressure to a situation, usually the worse it gets. So if someone is really struggling, for example, and that we're in a one-on-one and their results are like not where they need to be, I usually like want to see real material. And I noticed this like creeping thing in sales teams where you talk about the work that you're doing, but you're not showing your work, right? If you talk to a designer and you immediately you'll look at their work and you'll know if it's good or bad. But in sales, like we don't do that nearly enough. We're not looking at the email. When's the last time like a sales leader sat down with an SDR and looked at all the email replies and that back and forth white space with a prospect? They don't do it. They just don't do it. When's the last time your AE manager scored all of the calls for all of your reps, at least one call in the past like 30 days? They don't do that. And so
why do you think they don't do it? Do you think it's because, like they've kind of lost the sense of how it feels on the field, or do you think they just don't have the time?
I think it comes down to like managers who go into management, were they running away for something or were they running towards something? And I find a lot of managers are running away from quota themselves. And so they get into management. It's like, I don't want to deal with that anymore. I'm going to work on recruiting. I'm going to work on special projects. I'm going to make myself look really busy so I don't have to do these things. Okay. It's an unfortunate reality. I see it a lot. Now, I don't think that all managers are like that, though. I think that is some managers. I think that there's also maybe the unsuredness themselves, which I think is okay, and even more the reason to dive in here because it's a learning exercise for the manager. I learn more from the team than they learn from me, and then as a result of that learning, I'm able to spread that knowledge across the organization really, really quickly. So experts know what they don't know as much as what they do know. And if you don't learn something, it's okay to make up for that. And then, have those teachable moments that really humanize you. It's okay. If I don't know something, I'll try to say it in front of the team. Like, I don't know this, I need to level up my own learning. So I think that's part of it too. But I think the real thing is that it's work. And we as humans, just like anything that, we usually like the quick answers and things like that. And it takes a lot of work to get into a cadence. where you're constantly reviewing calls. It sometimes can be like monotonous at times as well. So those are a couple of thoughts of like why people don't do it. But I do think companies are getting better at it. I think that people are talking about this more and more, and I certainly will keep talking about it until it's standard practice. But yeah, those are just a couple thoughts there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And regarding your relationship with your CEO, because you said like it took a lot of time, a lot of trust to kind of like build that position for you.
Yeah.
How exactly do you report to him right now? Do you report on a set of specific KPIs, or is there anything else you report to him directly?
So I do have specific KPIs. The thing is like sometimes the KPIs will change. So for example, if we say we've stabilized the performance on the SDR team, I'll usually maintain my one-on-ones with them. These days it's with the management teams. I do one-on-ones with the managers of the SDR and the directors. So I'll do one-on-ones with them and maintain that team. Then I might have a goal in a particular month to focus on the inbound conversion rates of the AEs, for example, and I might very focus on that while I'm maintaining something with the SDRs. Sometimes I might have goals across the whole team. A lot of times it can be situational based on the needs of the business, but it's always rooted back to this idea of revenue. Is the revenue performing? How can it be improved? Sometimes it's leadership development, like if we need a new manager. Sometimes it's onboarding. So it really is a broad role, but it's really kind of core is this, coaching and people development piece as well. As we scale, you mentioned the raise. I've been like much more focused on manager enablement, for example, which is traditionally a big headache for companies at scale, because it's like all those people who are on the front lines are now one step higher up, and you're filling in with new managers who don't have as much experience, but they have a lot of responsibility with the front lines. So how do you enable them very quickly, just going through that scaling process? And that's been like so fun to figure out, seeing like all these people in the company step into leadership roles, and of things that I was doing largely in the beginning of the company. And that has just been so fascinating to see, like the manager enablement component and just like the ownership and the care that they put into it has been really great too.
That's really, really interesting. It's been 15 minutes since we're together. I know a lot of people usually arrive late during the webinar or live session. I'm guessing we're like a few hundreds right now. So just I want to make a quick recap. I'm with Michael Tuso, Director of Revenue Performance at Chili Piper. Michael, just I guess now it's a good time for you to kind of like let our audience know, because we didn't talk too much about Chili Piper. So what does that do exactly? And yeah, how can you help like sales team, SDRs, and AEs?
Yeah, absolutely. So Chili Piper's slogan is that we make meetings happen. So we're the #1 meeting lifecycle automation platform. And so what that really means is that you can use it as a scheduling tool across your entire funnel to help with conversion rates, no shows, from marketing all the way down to post sales as well.
Awesome. And we already have a lot of questions in the comments. I'll try to make this as interactive as possible. I have tons of questions. You probably have tons of questions, so make sure to ask them. I've got someone from my team selecting the best questions. So the first question from the audience we have is, would actually be awesome to find out what tools are used in order to measure the performance of the sales team. You mentioned that Chili Piper would help you out, like when you have inbound leads, etc. But do you use any other tools? You were mentioning like call performance, etc. Do you use any tracking tools out there?
So yeah, so we use a number of tools. I try to, so my sort of philosophy there is don't skimp on tools, but I also prefer a lean tech stack. So if the team needs it, we get it, but we don't buy excess tools just to have them. It's kind of how we think. And so the tool that I live in a lot is Gong.
Okay.
It's we use it for all of our, across all of our revenue teams for coaching, and it's been really great for that. A tool for enablement that we just purchased is Guru. That's been really incredible for like a knowledge share across the organization. We also use a BI tool called grow.com. They're one of our customers as well. And we basically set like what metrics that are not in our sales engagement tools, for example. We find that some of the sales engagement tools aren't quite robust enough in terms of what we need to like make a hugely meaningful impact in terms of like the business intelligence side of the tool. So we use Grow in a different way for that. We also just purchased like Atrium for this like analytics piece too, which has been really great. But for the enablement tools, we use WorkRamp and Guru, and then Grow and Atrium for the more BI analytics. And then I use Gong most heavily for the call coaching and things like that. Is where we live every single day.
Awesome. And actually talking about coaching, there is something I'd like also to, someone from the audience was willing to ask you this question, but I'm also super interested. So I'd like to know what kind of coaching exercise and session you've organized, and also like how you've performed, and even if you have like cool insights. So describing a coaching session from, for example, for SDR or AE, and what type of insights you got from those sessions.
That's a really great question. I like to change up exercises based on kind of the needs of the moment. I actually have them doing one this week where I've paired up AEs with account managers to do like a little bit of a mind share where they're listening to each other's calls. So that's like one that we're doing right now. With SDRs, SDRs, you know, modern SDRs have become very email heavy. And so one of the things, one of the exercises I'll do is if they get a reply, I'll have them first write a reply back and what they think that they should say back to the prospect, and then we'll edit it together, and then we'll send the real reply that we end up sending out. And I find that takes a little bit longer, but it really builds the skill of like the SDR being able to be responsive, right? If you're automating the accounts and like how, you know, those tools, like the data tools, and then you're automating the messages largely, there's not a lot of variables left there, you know, except for the cold call itself. And then that white space when someone replies. So if you coach to that, I found that it really can ramp up metrics really quickly. I remember one month they had like a good month, and then the next month we did a little bit more coaching in this area, and the numbers like took off like crazy. So that's like one exercise we do frequently with the SDRs that's really impactful. And we'll have them, you know, ideally two of them in a group and talking about it. We're really, really big on peer-to-peer feedback as well, not just like me saying this is what you need to be doing, but each of them giving feedback to each other as well. Because like if I'm not in the room, I want them talking like without me and instilling this like culture across the team. We'll also, like if I get on a demo, like we'll share information from other companies in Slack and things like that, and they love that too. And specifically like analyzing it. So that's something with the SDRs. With the AEs, we have a regular cadence of call coaching. So we'll, after we listen to a call, we'll all, there's usually like 3 or 4 of us in a review session. We'll each score it. So we have 3 sort of ways that or 3 criteria that we use to score calls. Super simple. We'll each go through and score it, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll give feedback to the person whose call we listen to, and it just kind of provides like a little bit more objective like space, I found, through the scoring rather than just talking about the call. It really gives you guardrails and to be able to have like a much more meaningful conversation. So I'd say like those 2 are the most typical, but at the same time we change up the activities that we do in terms of coaching like pretty regularly.
Nice. And you were mentioning like you're essentially giving like a grade on calls that you're listening to. Do you have a certain grid of, for example, there is, let's say, 6 aspects of the call that I want to grade. Let's say if it's a discovery call, I'm gonna try to see like what's the tone of the person, what question are they asking, how many questions are they asking, like this type of things. Like what type of parameters do you score usually?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So our CEO is a huge fan of the rule of three. So as a result, we've built that rule into like all of our frameworks. So something like tonality will be sort of part of the first criteria. So the first one is emotional discovery, and the reason I'll run through the three real quick, and then I'll talk about them. So the three criteria for AE calls that we use is emotional discovery, T-table, and then next steps to the finish line. Emotional discovery is like where the intro to the call and the tonality and all of that will be measured. The main thing that we're looking for is this idea of like people are emotional beings and they often buy things on an emotional basis. And so in the discovery portion of the call, we really want to find their motivation. A lot of times salespeople have that inclination to want to pitch without really figuring out why the person is there or why it matters. So we have that specifically there to counteract that kind of frequent thing we see in sales. So that's sort of in a nutshell, the emotional discovery piece, the people motivation piece right off the top. The T-table is like just means to only show them what they care about in the demo. So a lot of times like salespeople will show extraneous information and things that don't matter and things like that. So the T-table just means to show them exactly where it comes from. Is you draw a line down on a sheet of paper. On the left side of the piece of paper, it says their requirements, and on the right side, you solve for those requirements. So that's kind of where it gets its name. And then next steps to the finish line.
Can you just give a few examples of requirements that you have?
Yeah. So let's say like in discovery, someone says that they need it to integrate with Salesforce. They really care about conversion rates, and they would want it to play well with their other tools, and that's really all they care about, and maybe like reminders as well.
Okay.
So then in the demo portion, you would show them those things, and that would be like it. You wouldn't show them a million other pieces of the product. And then the last piece is next steps to the finish line. And so the next steps to the finish line is really meant to get away from this whole like end of a sales call where someone says, okay, what next steps should we do? Like, what can I send you? Like, and it's super vague and not really meaningful to the person. And so what we want them to do is we call it like future stating. So like the idea of like you're almost like mind mapping what you want the end result to look like and then work backwards, or almost like what would it look like if you lost the deal, and then think through the specific, very specific things that the prospect needs to do from now until deal one. So don't say things like, what can I send you, or things like that. Like have a little bit more of a smoother conversation there. With all of that said, it's intentionally has ambiguity, and a lot of people I found are really uncomfortable with that. I was listening to a podcast with Reid Hoffman and Reed Hastings on Masters of Scale, and it was so interesting. It really captured this concept. And people at Reed Hastings doesn't want people at Netflix who are uncomfortable with this like ambiguity. And the thing is, like, humans are very complex, right? So you don't always have it spelled out exactly to a T, especially in these like sales motions. And so I thought that podcast kind of highlighted our philosophy with this, is like kind of giving intentional ambiguity, and then coaching serves as the net to help with the execution piece to carry them through. As a result, I have seen people come in that have really wanted to grow. They come to Chili Pepper because they want to grow, and then as a result, it's just been so great to see like how when someone starts and then we give them this ambiguity and then we coach them and they grow so much in their roles.
That's really interesting. And actually, there is a question jumping on this. Someone wants to challenge their manager. So, as an inside sales, what can my manager do to make sure that I'm continuously learning and improving my sales skills?
Yeah, I think that it really just starts with the schedule. Like it's so simple to do, but just like time block your schedule, with your manager. If you're not doing it today, just be like, hey, I actually one time I forgot to schedule someone when they got promoted for a role. And it was so cool because they approached me and they were like, hey, Tuso, like, we don't have this scheduled. I'm going to schedule this. And I was like, that is a culture that I want, where the salesperson is saying, like, I'm just going to go ahead and schedule it, right? Because I forgot. And so I think like that kind of mentality is really great, because like we as individuals are all responsible for our own learning and growth. So if you're not getting that from your manager, it's really important for you to communicate that to them. Suggest something like, can we put 30 minutes, an hour on the calendar every week or bi-weekly or once a month, whatever your needs are. And then suggest like what the cadence would be. Maybe we just like can review calls. Maybe I can show you the emails that I've sent out this week, and just establish that cadence. What happens once you establish that cadence is you get a lot more advanced really, really quickly with what you're discussing, the material, outside material that you're referencing, and things like that. So I would just like lightly recommend, like, trial it for 1 week, trial it for 1 month, and see how it goes if you're not doing that today. But I really do think it starts with the calendar, and then adhere to it moving forward.
Yeah, agree with you're responsible for your own learnings. And I think it's important. I think it goes both ways, coaching. As you were mentioning early on, you've learned a lot from your team and you're helping spreading the knowledge. But if people come to you for help, you'll be there. And sometimes, you're expecting from people also to book a slot in your calendar and discuss what their needs are. And I was actually wondering, because we barely discussed the fact that the sales team is fully remote, which raised a lot of questions. How exactly do you manage like a fully remote team? Where are people based? How many are there? Can you give us a bit of an overview?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. And honestly, like, I forget that I used to manage in an office, because I just like feel like working remotely has really elevated my communication skills, like with the team. I feel like it's much easier to manage. I feel like the biggest thing is I feel like it really helps me like zone in on where that individual is needs like the most help, rather than like in an office. I felt like it was always too general. I felt like what I said earlier, like where you're not looking at someone's work, like, show me the emails, let's listen to the calls, like that simple cadence doesn't take place as much in the office. I found too many meetings, like too many the biggest thing for me was distractions. Like, I counted one time, I walked in the door and I walked to go get coffee, and I walked to my desk and I got interrupted 14 times like before I got to my desk. And just like now I'm able to like zone in and just focus on people development without the million like distractions, actually in a much like easier way. I was a skeptic, like a lot of people, with the whole remote working, and now like I'll never go back to the office. Like I do like the hybrid model, like where you have a WeWork and you're able to travel and you're able to see your coworkers and things like that. But the traditional like stay in your seat for X amount of time, and then we'll equate that with your overall success. It just doesn't work. And when we're seeing that in the past year, like, people got more productive and challenged a lot of assumptions that people were holding, and businesses actually were pretty transformational in the past year as a result of remote work. They saved money, they did better on revenues. And I think it comes back to this concept of autonomy, and people have a fundamental need for autonomy, which creates a better connection to their work. And why should water cooler chat and being in an office supersede that? And so it took me a little while to get to that point where I would say that, but I firmly believe it now. And I think that remote work has really been a blessing to Chili Piper and a huge part of our success, particularly in the past year.
That's really interesting. And truth is, talking to a lot of SDRs, I found out that, like for some people, it's great. As you mentioned, like they are able to zone out. They are really like, in their own work, and they can be really great at executing. They're much more efficient. They are better at communicating. But for some others, it feels like sometimes they are doing too much whenever they're at home, and tend sometimes to burn out.
Yeah.
How exactly do you prevent this type of things? Because we went from being in the office with everyone, getting energy from the outside, also
Yeah.
from okay, you're at home, like your numbers, your quota, and you're just gonna go grind and sometimes burn out.
Yeah, I think I think we're a little bit blessed here because I've heard this from a lot of companies with the whole burnout, and we've experienced it to some extent too. Because you have time to walk around, you have like back to back to back meetings when you're on Zoom all day. So I get the burnout piece. I think that is sort of something separate. I think again that goes back to scheduling. Like, do you have time blocks in your calendar? Take your walk around your neighborhood. One of the things I do every day is I put my headphones on, and I listen to an audio book, and I go on a long walk twice a day, and that really like grounds me. And in the morning when I leave, that's sort of like my commute to work, and I have my headphones on and I'm listening to a book, right? And then when I'm done, I do that again, and it separates my home life from my work life, psychologically. So like psychologically commute to work, and that really works for me. I think people need to create a system to get out of this like burnout thing. So I get that. I also don't think that the burnout is because of remote work. I think that the burnout is because you're not able to do all of the other things that you're doing. Like Bill Gates like said, like people are going to be leveraging their communities more. I think a lot of people were getting a lot of their social interaction from their employees or colleagues at work. And I think like, okay, well, since I've shifted to remote work for the past almost 4 years, I've really leveraged my own community. And like, that's where I get my like social interaction from and things like that. And I really leverage that community. And for my coworkers, I really just expect for them to be like pleasant to work with and highly skilled at what they do. And so I think we kind of attract this type of person at Chili Piper because we message it out there. We're intentional about that. We want people who are coachable. We are very meticulous about our hiring process. And so we get that type of person. But I think the causality piece of burnout is important to like zone in on, because it's like very easy to be like, oh, it's remote work. I've been, I know a lot of people where remote work has really been transformational. I know other people because of their situation where maybe they need a WeWork, maybe they need HQ once a week. I think the idea here is not just saying remote work. I think it's allowing people to work in such a way that works for them, which goes back to the autonomy piece that we were talking about earlier. Like people just, they need that connection to their work, and they need to be able to do it in accordance with like what works for them. So kind of a long answer, but I'm pretty passionate about that one.
No, it's definitely interesting. I was so we have about like 10-ish minutes left, and I see like questions popping in. So
Okay.
ask your last question on the chat if you want. And a question that was just asked, jumping on what you said about like having a remote team. Like people are changing in the way they get motivated, from where they're getting their energy, how do they disconnect, etc. But I'm wondering, like, do you organize anything from the team to bound? Like when you have an office, you can organize like game nights or this type of thing. Are these the things you do on a remote base, or how exactly do you do this?
Yeah, that's funny you asked. So I think it was my first year at Chili Piper. Shortly after joining, we flew the entire company to Paris, and we hung out for
You should
a
have
week.
called.
I know. Next time we will. Our founders are from one of our founders from there. So we went to Paris for about a week with the whole team, and it was just like, because we don't see each other, it was like, oh my gosh, like I've never met you. And it was like, I talk to you every day. There's a lot of people at Chili Pepper I talk to every day that I've never met, which just kind of sounds crazy. But then when we do see each other, it's this like huge thing, and we're so grateful, and it energizes us, and we work really hard to hit whatever goal to be able to go. So that was the first one. The second one, we went to Ibiza, and the company was much larger than.
Not
I think
bad.
we had tripled in size. Yeah, and we rented this like huge mansion in Ibiza. It was so fun. It was like really about the camaraderie and the people. It was just so fun, and it was just like a really great way to get together. we do other things like that as well. We have a policy that if pipers get together, the company will expense it. So like if I meet up with all the people in the Pacific Northwest and we go rent an Airbnb, we could go out to dinner, like we can expense all of that. So that's kind of our policy. We actually had people meet up yesterday in New York, and there was like 10 chili pipers meeting in New York. So that's kind of our policy. It's like really fun because people will move around. We have people go to South America, go to Mexico, go to Arizona, so it's like, it's really fun. I never know where the team is because we move around a lot. And we kind of have this culture where we hire the type of people that are very focused on their work, and then we respect that they'll do it. And as a result, they're living their lives and doing things that they wanted to do and going to places that they have wanted to go. One year I worked in four different countries, which is important to me. And so we tend to attract that type of individual.
Nice. And more like on top of gathering people, to some places, do you, I don't know, organize like game night remotely or this type of things? Or do you feel like it's complicated to get the same feeling as whenever you're like meeting face to face with your teammates?
Yeah. So we've done like bingo. We've done, we're starting to do things like that more and more. In the beginning of the company, we didn't as much. We just really look forward to these like trips and things like that. But now that we have like a bigger team and everybody doesn't necessarily know everyone now, we do have more events like this, like bingo and creative events that we have like a culture committee that will like put together and things like that. So we have these same events that you would have in the office, which have been really fun. It's a little bit newer. We've been doing it the past like 6 months or so, but the feedback on it has been really great.
No, that's really great. And another question I had for you is, because as you mentioned, like in your team, even though you tend to attract similar people who are very autonomous, like to work from anywhere, like to get their work done, etc., still people can be different. And in terms of coaching, how exactly do you adapt, or maybe you don't, but how do you adapt, if you do, the coaching on each personality? Do you have like processes in place, or how exactly do you handle this?
This is a really important question that I don't think that we talk about enough. It's really insightful. So I think that there's the personality, it's kind of you're mentioning there. And then I think there's also the performance piece, which is usually what I'm leaning into a lot. And where the performance piece comes in for me is like, where is this particular person struggling? So I might be struggling with like, gosh, I do a great discovery, but just like that end of the call, I just keep messing it up. And that's okay. Like, maybe your portion of the call or your part of the process is a little bit different. And usually that's the case. Like usually one person will be doing better at something else and someone is doing better at another piece. And so recognizing that and then coaching to like where they are is a big part of what I focus on. So there's like one person on our team that does a really good job at like the intro, but then the end of the call with like pricing, he doesn't bring the same like energy. It like tapers off in energy. The questions aren't as good, and then isn't thinking about kind of the next steps in super concrete ways. So I will talk to him and coach him in a bit of a different way than someone that has the opposite problem. So that's the performance thing. In terms of personality, and then the last thing I'll say, and then we don't just let it go after that. We follow up on that, and in our next call, that's the first thing we're going to talk about. Hey, did you practice this over the past week? Like, how did it go? How can I help out with this? And then the other piece is the personality piece. I don't think we have too much of a problem with this. Like, yes, personalities are different, but I found that it's more so the performance piece, like where people are struggling with different things. With that said, people have different learning styles. They receive communication differently and things like that. I think that really comes from like reading into the situation. I think EQ matters a lot in situations like that. Do you almost have to conduct discovery to figure that out, though, like yourself as a leader. Like a lot of leaders, particularly new managers, want to come in and just tell. I would really encourage people to figure out why people are doing things the way that they are, and then you can start prescribing. Don't just start prescribing like right away. That exercise of discovery on behalf of the sales manager is like super useful to getting that behavioral change that you want, whether it's personality or performance or otherwise. Or, hey, I'm feeling like this part isn't where it needs to be. Like, why do you think I'm feeling that way? Things like that. And really just the whole process. People generally don't love listening to their own calls. They don't love getting feedback, things like that. So I would be really cognizant on the delivery, the tonality of the deliverer. You usually want to give advice where it's moving the needle and helping you elevate that person to the next step. Sometimes that feedback is difficult for people to receive. So it's super important to deliver it in a way that is friendly and how you would want to receive it if you were on the receiving end.
Whenever you're saying like a feedback where it's moving the needle, could you give like a specific example? For example, a situation you faced where someone was not doing something properly, you gave a feedback and it evolved.
Yeah. So we'll say recently, someone just yesterday we were talking about this. Someone was doing discovery, and in the middle of discovery, he would want to solve everything with the product, whereas he could have just followed up with another question, and the prospect would have actually solved it much faster. He would have gotten more information, and he could have just waited to solve it a little bit later on. So he got the prospect talking kind of at a surface level, and then he would say things like, Chili Piper can do XYZ and things like that. In that specific moment, you want to resist the urge to tell, and that when you're going into that, the first level questions are really easy to ask. It's the second, third, and fourth questions that people always get hung up on. So like once they offer up information, the inclination is to just say like, oh, Chili Pepper can fix your conversion rates. But like you want to dig into like an emotional human level, like where's the friction? Why is he here? Like what's that emotional thing that's like bothering him? And like that takes questions to do that. So what we worked on, we call it bouncing on a cue. When you're given a social cue, like I'm not happy with the process, you don't want to say Chili Piper can fix your process. And we laugh and we say, oh, that's super simple, like everybody knows it and things like that. And then we're in the calls and we're doing the same thing that this person did. It's not so simple when we're the ones in the hot seat. And so the exercise we did is we had him practice over and over. What if I give you this cue? What if I give you that cue? How would you respond with this one? And it's meant to just build that really micro skill of like when you're given that, ask another question to dig deeper and go a little bit deeper, and then compile all of your information, and then you can solve it. So that was a really specific example from yesterday, and now he's really zoned in on that one thing. And now next week we'll check on that. If he's progressed, we'll move on. If he hasn't, we'll stay with it for as long as we need to until he's got that skill down, and then we'll go knock down the next big thing that he can work on.
Nice. And I'm curious, like, because this typical situation where your SDR, for example, doing discovery call is, like trying to solve the problem for the prospect. It usually happens when you're passionate about the product you're selling, or you're really like, like feeling the value of what you're selling. So how exactly do you kind of like hold people down? Like how exactly do you transmit the message that it's important to ask this type of question for people to realize by themselves that the product is the actual solution to their needs?
Yeah, I think it's like explaining that dynamic to the salesperson, that this is what usually happens and this is how you avoid it. But the SDR isn't there to necessarily do the wholesale, right? But they're there to solve a problem. right? And the short-term problem is the meeting, right? The SDR is selling the meeting, not the product itself. But really, in on one of the things we do in onboarding is, yes, we teach the product, but what was a problem that your company was originally built to solve? Like, start with that. What was that problem? Teach that in onboarding before you teach the product, then solve with the product. The human inclination is, when we know a lot about something, is we talk and talk, about it, and it's really hard to resist that. But from the other person's point of view, we want them to be motivated. So we'll do like role play exercises where the SDR is the prospect, and then we'll have them, switch and things like that, so they can feel what it feels like being on the other end of it as well, and not just receive the feedback as well, but actually like participate as well. But I think it really starts with this is the usual dynamic that happens, is when you get this information, you're going to want to pitch it. But the important thing here, we call it mentalizing, is like figuring out like where the person is, and then using the sales process to and questions to get them where they need to be. We call it mentalizing. So that's kind of how we think about that piece.
No, that's really interesting. And I guess we're gonna jump to the last question from the audience, because I know your time is precious. So what do you think about anonymous feedback from employees to help management process to improve? So do you do something like that is anonymous rather than direct feedback where, okay, I have to set a time in a calendar and talk face to face? Is that something you've set up in place?
So anonymous feedback from employees?
Yeah, from employees to their top management, for example, in order to improve like this process.
Yeah, so it is something we are currently working on. Because of the scale, we just completely revamped our onboarding process. And one of the big initiatives that I would like to deploy for coaching, training, and onboarding is this feedback like mechanism. We have a culture where we'll pretty much tell each other one-on-one right now. But moving into this world of like one to many, where you have many employees, we want to instill like more survey data and things like that as well. So currently in flight with some of these things.
Awesome, really cool. Michael, it was really awesome talking to you. You shared a lot of nuggets and insights. Where can people connect with you or ask you questions if they have some more?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to connect with everyone and continue the conversation there and help in any way I can.
Awesome. So we'll have Daria from my team put your LinkedIn profile in the comments so people can connect. Thanks a lot for your time. It was awesome talking to you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.